My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 78 years old, and for 53 of those years I taught fourth graders in a small American town where the winters cracked your lips and the summers softened your bones. And I thought I had seen every kind of trouble until my 12-year-old grandson pressed his mouth to my ear and whispered, "Grandma, in few days my parents are going to take away all your fortune and savings." And the night folded in on itself like a closing book I hadn't finished reading, didn't it? It happened in the quiet hour when the house settles and the pipes knock like someone asking to be let back into a life they shouldn't have left, and I felt his breath tremble on my cheek, so thin and earnest I could almost count the seconds between his words, and in that moment a part of me, the schoolteacher part, wanted to correct his grammar, but another part, the mother who had buried a husband and a brother and a dog on the same plot of land, grabbed the arm of the chair because falling is different when you are 78, and I said very softly, "What do you mean, Noah? Because didn't you want to know exactly how a child learns to whisper like that?" Noah's eyes were wide, the kind of wide that means a kid has seen something he shouldn't have, a wide like a screen door in a storm, and he pulled his hoodie sleeves over his knuckles and said, "Dada's papers. Mom said they're going to file them Monday. She said, we'll make her sign the power of attorney or we'll get the court to give it to us anyway." And then Dad laughed. And I felt that laugh like a blade that had been politely warmed before it was slipped between your ribs. Can you imagine hearing your own child's laugh as a stranger's weapon? "Where were you?" I asked, and the room smelled of cinnamon and old books, the sweet and the dust, like every good memory I'd ever tried to protect. And he said he was in the hallway because he'd been sent to bed without dessert for using my Netflix account to watch a movie rated above his age. And he'd stopped to listen because my daughter's voice had gotten sharp enough to cut paper. And I knew the sharpness because I'd seen it grow from the toddler who used to throw her sippy cup when the milk wasn't cold. Enough into the woman who once told me, "You still keep your money in accounts you barely understand." And I wondered when exactly love learns to hold a knife behind its back. Don't you? "Show me where the papers are," I said, and that was the teacher voice, the field trip counting, bus evacuation drill voice that had talked trembling children off bathroom floors and coaxed confessions from boys with pockets full of stolen erasers. And Noah shook his head and said, "He takes the briefcase to work, but the copies are in Mom's blue file box in the bedroom closet." And I picture the closet, boxes like Russian dolls, each hiding smaller and darker truths, and my hands started to feel like someone else's hands, like gloves filled with memory, and I thought, in a few days is not a lifetime, but it is also not a minute. What can a woman do with a few days, right? "Why are you telling me?" I asked, and I meant it with all the weight of a woman who had knitted hats for every new baby in a church where the stained glass throws light like confetti on Sundays, and he looked down at his shoes, scuffed black sneakers I'd bought in August, and he said, "Because you bought my shoes." And he moved his foot like he was waving to himself. "And you help me with my math, and you smell like pancakes, and you don't take things that aren't yours." And something about the clean truth of a child's list made the room tilt again, because what if love is just a series of small debts we pay faithfully until someone tries to repossess our heart? Do you see? I asked Noah if he was scared, and he said, "I'm scared of Dad when he gets the red mark on his neck." And I knew exactly the red mark. Anger flowering under a beard he'd grown to seem serious in meetings with men who needed to hear numbers, not apologies, and he added, "I'm scared of Mom when she whispers to her phone." And I pictured my daughter, Harper, with the phone she treats like a second mouth, telling someone how complicated it is to handle aging parents, how the paperwork is so confusing, how the accounts are spread out, how responsible she is, how tired, how brave, and I could hear the applause from people who didn't know me at all. Can't you? I told Noah we were going to make hot cocoa because planning is easier when your hands are busy, and we stood in the kitchen where the linoleum remembers every spill and all the arguments about whether real butter is healthier than margarine if it keeps you from eating 3 slices of toast, and I whisked and asked him to tell me everything word for word, because in my life details had always saved me, and he said, "Mom said, we can say she's forgetful. We can say she fell last month." And Dad said, "We'll make it look like we're protecting her." And I remembered the fall, just a stumble on the back steps, my pride bruised more than my hip, and I thought how every story can be bent until it snaps. Isn't that the trick? I kept stirring even after the milk had started to steam because my hands needed rhythm, and I said, "They will try to paint me as incompetent." And the word felt bitter on my tongue, like chewing aspirin, and Noah said, "What does that mean?" And I told him it means they will call me names in a polite way until a judge believes the names are facts. And he squeezed the mug with both hands like it could warm him from the inside out. And I realized I was explaining to a child how adults deal with signatures instead of masks. Isn't that a kind of robbery you don't see coming? I took out my little black notebook, the one that lived in the drawer with the tea towels and receipts and 2 rubber bands that have been there since 2003, and I started a list, because lists were my ladders out of pits too deep to climb, and at the top I wrote, assets, and beneath that, bank accounts, First National, teacher pension, Riverstone Credit Union savings, Highfield brokerage, municipal bonds. And then, house deed, joint tenancy, now sole, and the words looked so calm there. On paper, like cows in a field that don't know about the slaughterhouse, and I wondered if calm handwriting could be a kind of armor. Would you trust that? Noah finished his cocoa and set the mug down carefully, like his hands had suddenly become too big for the world, and he said, "Grandma, what are you going to do?" And that question sat between us like a new piece of furniture we weren't sure how to arrange, and I thought about my husband, Robert, how he used to say, "You're the best shortstop I ever saw at catching life's bad throws." And I could feel him in the room like a draft that knows your name, and I said, "We are going to make the truth louder." Because that's all I had ever done that worked, isn't it? I started with the house because the house is a country and the deed is a constitution, and I pulled my file from the hall cabinet, the fireproof one that looks like a small, stubborn refrigerator, and I checked the latest deed, put in my name alone after Robert passed, and I checked the beneficiary designations on the brokerage accounts, and I saw my daughter's name on one, the one I had meant to change last spring when I was distracted by a chest cold and a new tomato plant that never took. And I felt that momentary flash of self-scolding that older women know too well, the voice that says, "If only you had been quicker, sharper, sterner." But self-blame is a trap set by thieves, so you'll sit still while they take, don't you think? I called my attorney, Judith Malone, 70 herself and sharper than a thumbtack under a church cushion, and left a message that said, "Judy, it's Evelyn. We need to meet tomorrow. Urgent family issue. Probable attempt at conservatorship. Documents already drafted on their side. Need to fortify accounts and record a contemporaneous competency statement." And I hung up and wrote down the time and the words I'd said, because timestamp sanity is a strange modern currency, but it spends well in court, doesn't it? Noah asked what a conservatorship was, and I told him it's when someone says they'll hold your umbrella in the rain, and then they take your house keys, your car, your purse, your memories, and you stand on the porch explaining to a stranger in a blue vest why the apples in your bag are really yours, and he nodded solemnly, like he was folding the idea and putting it in his pocket for later. And I wanted to cry, because I'd spent my life trying to keep children from learning certain lessons too soon. But fate is a poor teacher who never checks the syllabus, right? We went upstairs together because courage is a pack animal, and in the guest room where the wallpaper has tiny violets wearing bonnets, I opened my safe and took out the camcorder I'd bought 9 years ago to record hymns for Robert when he was too sick for church, and I set it up on the dresser, pointed at the chair by the window, and I said, "I am going to make a record." And Noah, serious as a notary, clicked it on. And I sat and said my full name, my date of birth, my social security number, my address. And then I began to talk about the day, the date, the news that my grandson had brought me. And I recited the months backward, named the presidents in order, solved a few multiplication facts out loud, read a paragraph from the Bible and one from a cookbook, because both are instructions for living, aren't they? Afterward, we watched a bit back so I could hear my voice and be sure it was steady, and it was the voice of a teacher taking attendance. Clear, tired, the kind of voice that says, "Everyone who is here counts." And I locked the recording in the safe with a bright sticky note that said, "Competency, 9:48 p.m. Witness, Noah Carter." And I placed the sticky note inside the case so that if someone found it they would know at once what it was and what it wasn't, because names are handrails on the stairs of panic, aren't they? Noah asked if he could sleep in the chair in my room, and I said yes because the dark sometimes asks children questions that daylight shouldn't have to answer, and he dragged in a blanket and fell asleep holding his game controller like a talisman, and I sat awake making another list. Tomorrow, bank manager, Ms. Doyle, attorney, J. Malone, Dr. Patel, cognitive assessment note. And each name was a brick, and the page was a wall, and behind the wall was my dignity, which I had never thought I would have to defend with this much paperwork. Isn't that something? Sometime after midnight, the house creaked the way old houses do when they are remembering births and arguments, and I heard my phone buzz on the nightstand, and it was a text from Harper, stopping by in the morning. Need to discuss some paperwork. Nothing to worry about. Love you. And that love you felt like a sticker placed over a crack in a window, cheerful and insufficient. And I stared at the three dots that meant she was still typing, the modern Morse code of anxiety, and then they vanished, and the screen went dark, and the silence felt like a dare, doesn't it? I thought about money the way you think of rivers, not as numbers but as motion, and I remembered every hour in a classroom, every winter coat I bought on a teacher's salary, every coupon clipped, every second shift evening after Robert died when I took on tutoring to help a kid who never paid attention until you asked him about dinosaurs, and maybe that's why the word fortune sits oddly in my mouth. Because my fortune is not just money. It is a map of where I've been, and who I've fed, and why. My table always is room for one more, and I wasn't ready to let someone rewrite that map with their tidy little arrows, are you? At dawn I made oatmeal on the stove, not the quick kind, the kind that requires you to stand there stirring while the window fogs and sparrows practice their morning arguments. And Noah sat up and blinked like he'd been somewhere far and returned, and he said, "Are you going to tell Mom I told you?" And I said, "No, I am going to tell your mother I still know how to sign my own name." And he smiled in the lopsided way his father used to before he learned to harden it, and he asked if he could stay for breakfast, and I said, "Always. Because some words should live forever in a house. Don't you agree?" At 9 sharp, Judith called back, and her voice was brisk with coffee and case law, and she said, "We'll move quickly, change beneficiaries, set transfer on death instructions, notarize a fresh, durable power of attorney naming anyone but the two of them, prepare a self-proving will, and draft a letter to be opened if they file. Also, get your doctor to write a contemporaneous note of cognitive function." And it felt like watching firefighters pull tools off a truck, efficient and kind, and I said, "Thank you." And she said, "Evelyn, we both know compassion without boundaries is a bonfire." And I thought of all the times I'd warmed my hands at that fire, and all the times it had tried to consume me. Haven't you been there too? By 10, Miss Doyle at the bank had me in her glass office with a pen that wrote like silk and a witness who smelled faintly of peppermint, and we updated designations like a seamstress reinforcing hems before a storm, and I learned a new phrase, trusted contact, and I chose Judith for that, because trust should be a verb before it's a noun. And I initiated alerts that would ping me if anyone tried to move money, like a thief tiptoeing on a wooden floor, and Miss Doyle looked at me over her glasses and said, "You're not the first," and I felt both comforted and broken by that sentence. Doesn't it bruise you too? At noon, Dr. Patel squeezed me between patients, and I took the tests with the patience of a woman who has proctored 1,000, and I named animals, and I drew a clock, and I remembered 5 words after 3 minutes because the words were river, bread, candle, winter, and boy, and I kept thinking of Noah as I repeated boy, boy, boy. And when Dr. Patel said, "You're as sharp as last year, maybe sharper," I laughed so hard I almost cried, and he typed the note and printed it with his careful signature, the kind of ink that stops arguments before they start. Do you know that kind? When I reached home, there's a car in my driveway I recognized from the day Harper had shown it off like a trophy, sleek and silver and somehow always thirsty for attention, and my front door was already open, and noises came from the kitchen, pots and drawers, and the hum of someone trying to look casual while doing something they shouldn't, and Noah squeezed my hand and whispered, "I told you." And we stepped inside, and there she was, my daughter, with my blue file box on the table and a smile on her face like a realtor in a neighborhood she can't afford, and she said, "Mom, good, you're here. Let's sort through some things so we can make life easier." And behind her, in the doorway, my son-in-law, Graham, leaned with his hands in his pockets the way men do to look harmless, which is almost always when they're not, and I felt the morning scaffolding of signatures and statements and courage creak, because a fortress is only a fortress until someone knocks on the gate. Isn't that true? "Evelyn," Graham said, using my first name like he'd found it in a drawer he shouldn't have opened, We've been talking, and we think it's time to simplify things for you." And his smile was the kind that never touches the eyes, and I set my handbag down and heard the little thud of the camcorder tape inside like a heartbeat, and I said, "What do you mean by simplify?" Because a teacher's best weapon is a question asked with too much politeness, and Harper slid a stack of papers toward me. Bright tabs like confetti on a cake you didn't order, and said, "Just routine stuff. Power of attorney, a few beneficiary updates, and a small withdrawal for the roof fund." And my eyes found the line where my name had been printed, as if I were a character in a story somebody else was writing. Do you hate that as much as I do? I did not sit, because sitting is a concession, and I did not touch the papers, because fingerprints are an intimacy not every page deserves, and I said, "No rush," and I watched their foreheads shift, tiny storms gathering over polite expressions, and I added, "I've already updated my documents this morning, and I have a doctor's note and a video in the safe, and if anyone tries to move a cent of my money without my consent, the bank will call my attorney before they call me." And for one wild second I felt taller than my own shadow, and then I saw Harper's eyes flick to the hallway, where the wall phone with the answering machine sat, blinking a red number. One, which I hadn't seen when we walked in, and something in me went cold, because why would the machine be blinking if I had listened to all my messages last night, unless someone had left one while we were gone? And why was Graham suddenly interested in my hallway like a man who knows where the wire cutters are? Can you feel what I felt? Noah took a step back, small and careful, like animals do when thunder rolls in summer, and I said, "Don't touch that machine." But the words came out a second too late, because Harper had already moved, quick as a cat, reaching for the play button with a smile too bright to be anything but a mask, and the mechanical voice began. "New message received at 11:02 a.m. from Judith Malone." And I saw Harper's finger hover like a hawk over a field, deciding whether to press and play what might be the sound of my salvation or the fuse to a long, terrible afternoon, and I swear the house itself held its breath with us, because what do you do when the proof you need most is about to be played in a room with the very people you fear? The message began with Judith's crisp voice. "Evelyn, call me as soon as you get this. Harper just tried to access your brokerage account from her phone at 11 a.m. We blocked it, but she left a trace. Also, I've filed a notice with the court preemptively, so if they attempt a conservatorship," and Harper slammed her palm on the stop button so hard the whole phone lurched, and her chest rose and fell like someone who'd been sprinting in a race she hadn't admitted she entered, and Graham's face went sheet white, and the room turned into something with edges, and Noah reached for me. Then suddenly there was a heavy knock at the front door, a knock that wasn't neighborly, a knock that comes with paper and badges, and every nerve in my body lit up because I knew in my bones that the next person to step over my threshold would decide whether my name was still mine by sundown, wouldn't they? The knock came again, 3 hard, deliberate raps that rattled the frame of my front door. In 78 years, I'd learned there's a language in knocking, and this one didn't ask permission. It was the kind of knock that came from people who already believed they had the right to be inside. Noah's little fingers tightened around mine, the same way he'd held my hand the day his father forgot to pick him up from school in the rain. Harper glanced at Graham, a flicker of unease darting across her face before she smoothed it over with that polite smile she'd perfected for her book club ladies. I stood motionless for a moment, listening. The house was so quiet that I could hear the faint whir of the answering machine still recovering from Harper's slap. My mind raced. Was it the police? A process server? Or worse, someone they'd called to make things official, while they still thought they had the upper hand? "Mom, it's probably nothing," Harper said, her voice like honey poured over shards of glass. "Why don't you let Graham get it?" That alone told me I needed to get to the door first. I'd spent too many years reading the pauses and tones in children's excuses not to hear the lie curled up in hers. I moved faster than I had in a decade, sliding past her, my house slippers whispering against the wood floor, my palm flat on the door before Graham even stood up. When I opened it, the cool autumn air rushed in, and with it, a tall woman in a charcoal coat, carrying a leather folder and a badge clipped to her lapel. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked, her voice even but firm. "Yes," I said, planting my feet. "I'm Dana Reese, court investigator." She glanced at Harper and Graham behind me before focusing back on me. I was assigned to follow up on a petition for conservatorship filed this morning in your name. It was like she'd swung the folder and smacked me across the face. This morning, while I was running between the bank and my lawyer, they'd already made their move. That's impossible, I said, my voice steady. I haven't filed any such petition. Her eyes softened, but her mouth stayed neutral. The petition was filed on your behalf by your daughter, Harper Ellis, citing concerns about your mental competency and your ability to manage finances. I'm here to verify your condition and living environment. I turned slowly to face Harper. You filed this. She didn't flinch. Mom, we were going to tell you. This is for your own protection. You've been making questionable decisions. Noah let out a sound, half a gasp, half a whimper, but I squeezed his hand to quiet him. I didn't want him caught in the middle of this crossfire. I stepped aside, letting Ms. Reese in, because I had nothing to hide, but every instinct told me to keep control of the space. She took in the living room, the tidy shelves, the photo wall. Her eyes flickered to Noah, then to the kitchen where the blue file box still sat like an uninvited guest at the table. Would you mind if we sat down? She asked. Of course, I said, guiding her to the armchair that always got the best light. I took the couch across from her, Noah beside me, while Harper and Graham lingered in the doorway like wolves pretending to be curious bystanders. Ms. Reese opened her folder and began with the basics, my name, my birth date, my address. I answered without hesitation, my voice clear. Then she asked about my income, my accounts, my recent transactions. I saw Harper glance at Graham when I mentioned the changes I'd made at the bank that morning. You've been making a lot of adjustments in the last 24 hours, Ms. Reese said carefully. Yes, I replied, meeting her gaze head-on. Because yesterday evening, my grandson informed me of a plan to take control of my finances without my consent. I reached for the camcorder case on the table and set it down gently. And I have proof, on video, that I am fully competent to manage my affairs. Along with the doctor's note from this morning. Harper's smile tightened. Mom, you're making this sound adversarial. It is adversarial. I cut in. When someone tries to steal from me under the guise of protection, that's not family. That's a predator. Ms. Reese looked from me to Harper. Mrs. Ellis, is what your mother is saying true? Did you attempt to access her brokerage account today? Harper's silence said everything. Graham shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. I slid the doctor's note across the table. This is from Dr. Patel, who assessed me not 2 hours ago. My attorney is prepared to file a counterpetition and a request for sanctions for fraudulent filing. The room seemed to shrink. Noah leaned toward me and whispered, She's mad now. I didn't need the warning. Harper's eyes had gone cold, the kind of cold that doesn't melt. Ms. Reese stood, gathering her folder. I'll be making my report to the court. Mrs. Carter, I suggest you keep all your documentation close. Mrs. Ellis, Mr. Ellis, you may wish to consult counsel before proceeding further. After she left, the silence was thick enough to choke on. Harper spoke first. You think you've won something here, Mom, but you haven't. You don't know everything. Graham stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. We've been patient. That patience is gone. And then, almost casually, Harper added, By the way, your will? You might want to check it. Things have a way of changing when you trust the wrong people to hold the keys. It was meant to rattle me, and it did. Because only one person had a copy of my will besides me and Judith. And if Harper was hinting at what I thought she was, then someone had gotten to Judith's office. I kept my face neutral, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Noah was still holding my hand, but his palm was sweaty now. I knew I had to move faster than they ever expected. But first, I needed to find out exactly what Harper meant about my will, and who else was working with her. That's when I heard it, the faint creak of floorboards from the back of the house. And I knew every sound in this home. That one didn't belong. Someone else was inside. The creak came again, slow, deliberate, like someone testing each step before committing their weight. My grip on Noah's hand tightened, and I felt him go rigid beside me. Harper and Graham didn't move, but I noticed Graham's eyes flick toward the hallway leading to the back bedrooms. "Who's here?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. Harper tilted her head, feigning innocence. "What are you talking about?" Another sound. This time, the faint click of a door easing shut. That was no accident. Someone was trying to stay hidden. My mind went straight to the blue file box still sitting on the kitchen table. If they couldn't get me to sign papers willingly, maybe they were after something else, documents, account numbers, anything they could use. I stood abruptly. "Stay here, Noah." Graham stepped forward, blocking the hallway. "Why don't you let me check?" "No," I said, stepping closer, my eyes locked on his. "You've done enough checking in my house." I sidestepped him, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The hallway seemed longer than usual, every framed photo of family vacations and school graduations watching me like silent witnesses. When I reached the last door, the one to the guest room I rarely used, I turned the knob slowly. It was locked. That's when my skin prickled. I never locked that door. Ever. "Open it," I called, loud enough for anyone inside to hear. Silence. I stepped back, weighing my options. Then I remembered the spare key I kept in the drawer of the hall table, taped to the underside, so no one would find it by accident. I retrieved it quickly, feeling Harper's eyes burning into my back from the kitchen. When I slid the key into the lock and turned it, there was a sudden flurry of movement inside, footsteps scrambling, something clattering to the floor. I flung the door open just in time to see a man in a dark jacket duck toward the open window. "Stop!" My voice rang out, louder than I thought my old lungs could manage. But he was already halfway out, his shoes scraping against the sill. I lunged forward, grabbing the back of his jacket. For a moment, we struggled, my hands clutching fabric, his weight pulling toward the open air. Then the jacket slipped free in my grip, and he was gone, dropping into the side yard with a muffled grunt before disappearing through the bushes. I stood there, breathing hard, clutching the jacket like a piece of shed skin. Inside the pocket, my fingers brushed something, a folded sheet of paper. I pulled it out and unfolded it. My stomach dropped. It was a photocopy of my will. Not the current one I'd updated years ago with Judith, but an older version, the one that left nearly everything to Harper. Across the top, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were the words, "Replace signature page." Footsteps approached from behind me. I turned to see Harper standing in the doorway, her expression carefully composed. "You shouldn't jump to conclusions, Mom," she said smoothly. "People will think you're paranoid." I held up the paper. "Who was that man?" She shrugged. "Probably some drifter. This neighborhood isn't what it used to be." But her eyes betrayed her, a quick dart to the jacket in my hand, then back to my face. She knew exactly who he was. I walked past her, the jacket and paper clutched tight, back to the living room. Graham was leaning against the wall, his phone in hand, his thumb frozen mid-text. "You," I said, my voice steady now, "are going to tell me who that was. Right now." He didn't answer. Instead, Noah spoke up from the couch, his voice trembling but loud. "Grandma, that's the man who came over last week when Mom said she needed help with the printer. He was in your office." My blood ran cold. This wasn't some sudden plot. They'd been moving pieces for weeks. I knew then that I couldn't wait for Judith to handle this in court. By the time paperwork crawled through the legal system, they could strip me bare. I had to take the next step myself, quietly, quickly, and without warning. I looked at Noah and gave him the smallest nod. He understood. We'd have to move tonight. But before I could speak, there was another knock at the door. Not heavy like before. This one was sharp, urgent, and accompanied by a voice calling, "Mrs. Carter? It's Detective Miles with the county police. We need to speak with you immediately." And in that moment I realized either my salvation or my downfall was standing on the other side of that door. The voice at the door was firm, professional, but in my world, authority could be a blessing or a trap depending on who whispered in its ear first. I tightened my grip on Noah's hand and walked to the door, each step feeling like I was marching toward a verdict. When I opened it, the man standing there was in plain clothes, a dark blazer, jeans, badge clipped at his belt, and eyes that scanned me quickly, like a man trained to size up a scene in seconds. Behind him, a uniformed officer lingered by a black and white cruiser parked at the curb. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm Detective Miles, County Police. I need to speak with you about a report filed this morning." He glanced past me into the house, his gaze catching briefly on Harper and Graham in the living room. "May I come in?" Harper moved fast, plastering on her sweetest smile. "Of course, Detective, come in. I'm her daughter, Harper Ellis. We were just—" But I cut her off. "Before you step inside, Detective, may I ask who filed the report?" His eyes met mine. "Your daughter." The air felt colder somehow. I could hear the faint tick of the clock in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of Noah's breath. "What exactly did she report?" I asked, my tone still polite but anchored in steel. "That she believes you're being financially exploited by an outside party," he said carefully, "and that your mental state may be compromised." There was their new angle. If they couldn't take over quietly, they'd use the law to paint me as a victim of some phantom con artist. And the cruelest part? They'd pretend it was out of love. I stepped back just enough to let him cross the threshold. "You're welcome to speak with me, Detective, but I'd like to do it privately." Harper's mouth opened to object, but Detective Miles held up a hand. "I agree. Mrs. Ellis, Mr. Ellis, please wait here." I led him to the dining room, shutting the sliding pocket door behind us. "Detective," I began, "before you ask me a single question, I need to tell you something. My grandson overheard Harper and her husband planning to take control of my finances without my consent. I have video and audio evidence of my competency from last night, a doctor's statement from this morning, and bank documentation showing they attempted unauthorized access to my account just hours ago." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "Additionally," I continued, sliding the folded photocopy of my old will across the table, "I found this in the pocket of a man who was hiding in my home minutes ago. My grandson identified him as someone who was in my office last week at Harper's invitation. That man fled through the window when I confronted him." Miles studied the document, his jaw tightening. "Do you know this man's name?" "No," I said, "but I believe Harper and Graham do." He nodded slowly. "Mrs. Carter, I'm going to be blunt. If what you're saying is true, your daughter has already committed multiple criminal offenses. But she's also trying to set a legal precedent by framing you as incompetent before we can investigate. That's why I'm here, to determine if there's cause to escalate this to Adult Protective Services or the DA's office." "I understand," I said. "And I can prove every word I've told you." Miles tapped the paper on the table. "Do you have that video and doctor's note on hand?" "Yes. They're in my safe. Would you like me to retrieve them?" He nodded. "And Mrs. Carter, do not, under any circumstances, let them know we're considering charges yet. Let them think this is still their game." I stood to get the documents, but the moment I slid the pocket door open, the atmosphere in the living room had shifted. Harper was sitting very still on the couch, her eyes narrowed. Graham was gone. "Where's your husband?" Miles asked. "He had to step out," Harper said flatly. I didn't like the sound of that. Neither did the detective. I retrieved the camcorder and doctor's note from my safe, handing them over. He reviewed them quickly, his eyes sharp with focus. "This is solid," he murmured. "Mrs. Carter, I'm going to advise something, and I need you to listen carefully. Change your locks tonight. Have someone you trust stay here with you. And, if possible, secure any additional copies of legal documents that may be vulnerable." I nodded, but my mind was already racing. Graham wasn't just stepping out. He was running an errand. And given how fast they'd moved already, I had a terrible suspicion about where he was headed. "Detective," I said, "I think Graham is on his way to my lawyer's office." Miles's head snapped up. "Where's that?" "Downtown," I replied. "Judith Malone. She's the only other person with a copy of my current will." His expression hardened. "Then we'd better get there first." He stood, motioning to the uniformed officer outside. "Mrs. Carter, come with me. Your grandson, too. Mrs. Ellis, you'll need to remain here for now." Harper's voice turned icy. You have no right to take her anywhere. I do, Miles said, showing his badge again. And I will. I gathered my handbag, tucked Noah close, and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. The cruiser door shut behind us, and as we pulled away, I glanced back at the house. Harper was standing in the doorway, her arms folded, her face unreadable. But I knew that look. It was the look of someone who wasn't done yet. And when we turned the corner, my phone buzzed in my purse. A new text message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. It read, "If you want to keep Noah safe, you'll stop this now." The words on the screen burned into my mind. If you want to keep Noah safe, you'll stop this now. My hand tightened around the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Noah, oblivious for the moment, was peering out the cruiser window at passing storefronts, his breath fogging the glass. I slipped the phone into my bag before he could see it. The last thing I needed was for fear to take root in him. Detective Miles noticed the change in my expression. What is it? I hesitated, then said, I just got a message. A threat. Let me see it. I handed him the phone. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. Unlisted number. Could be a burner phone. Mrs. Carter, this changes the game. We're not just dealing with financial manipulation anymore. They're escalating. We'll have our tech unit trace it, but I need you to promise me something. Until I tell you otherwise, Noah stays in my sight or yours at all times. I nodded, my stomach twisting. Do you think they would actually? He didn't answer directly. People under pressure do unpredictable things. The cruiser sped through downtown, siren off but lights flashing. When we pulled up to Judith Malone's office, my chest eased slightly at the sight of her car still in the lot. Miles hustled us inside. Judith was in her office, surrounded by open file drawers, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Evelyn. Thank God. She stopped when she saw the detective. What's going on? We think someone may try to interfere with your files, Miles said. Possibly today. We need to secure Mrs. Carter's documents. Judith's eyes narrowed. They already tried. About 20 minutes ago, some man came in here saying he was sent by you to pick up a copy of your will. My receptionist stalled him while I called security, but he left before they arrived. Dark jacket? I asked. She nodded. Yes, tall, mid-40s, smelled faintly of cologne and cigarette smoke. It was him. The man from my house. Judith pulled my will from a locked drawer. Current and untouched. I've also got your power of attorney paperwork, trust documents, and beneficiary changes. We can store a second set in the bank's safe deposit box by this afternoon. Miles agreed, but I could feel the urgency still gnawing at him. Mrs. Carter, he said, whoever sent that text knows you're not giving in. That makes you dangerous to them. I looked at Noah. He was standing by the window, tracing the outline of the courthouse with his finger. And they know he's my weakness, I murmured. Judith leaned forward. Evelyn, I think it's time we consider a move. A move. Out of your house. At least temporarily. I know you've lived there for decades, but right now it's a war zone, and they have home field advantage. If they want to corner you, that's where they'll do it. The thought of leaving my home made my chest ache, but deep down I knew she was right. Miles added, we can put you somewhere safe, somewhere they won't find you easily. But we'll need to act fast, before they realize we're changing the rules. I looked at Noah again, then back at them. We'll go. Tonight. Judith began gathering papers into a thick envelope. Here. Everything you'll need. If something happens to me, you have the originals. Miles's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and turned the screen so I could see. It was an email forwarded from the police department. The subject line read, Evelyn Carter, emergency guardianship, hearing scheduled. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Filed under emergency provisions, which meant they were trying to convince a judge I was in immediate danger for myself or others. They're moving fast, Miles said grimly. Too fast, Judith added. If they get that order, they can freeze your accounts before lunch. I straightened my shoulders. Then we'll move faster. Miles started planning aloud. Overnight relocation, security detail for Noah, early morning court appearance with our own evidence. But as he spoke, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. Last warning. Stop this or the boy disappears. And before I could even react, Noah turned from the window, his face pale. Grandma, someone's in the parking lot taking pictures of us. I rushed to the blinds and peered out. There, leaning casually against a black SUV, was the man in the dark jacket. And this time he was smiling at me. The man's smile was the kind that didn't belong to strangers. It was too confident, too certain, like he knew the ending of a story I hadn't even finished reading. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were locked on Noah. I yanked the blinds closed so fast the slats clattered against each other. "Detective," I said, my voice low but urgent. "He's here. The man from my house. The man Judith just described." Miles was already moving toward the door. "Stay inside. Both of you." He slipped out, the uniformed officer following close behind. Through the thin crack in the blinds, I saw them approach the SUV. The man didn't flinch. He just slid his phone into his pocket and said something I couldn't hear. Miles spoke, gesturing toward the building, his stance firm. The man shrugged, smirking like a child caught with crumbs on his shirt, then climbed into the SUV. The engine roared, and in seconds he was gone. Miles returned a minute later, his expression grim. "Plates are registered to a rental company. Fake ID on file." He wouldn't give a name. Judith crossed her arms. "You know what that means. They're paying him in cash, and he's just a piece on the board. We're not going to scare him off with a conversation." Noah's voice was small. Why was he looking at me like that? I crouched down in front of him, holding his shoulders gently. "Because he knows you're the bravest one here. But we're not going to let him anywhere near you. Not now, not ever." The boy nodded, but his eyes darted to the window again. I could see it, the seed of fear taking root. That alone made my resolve sharpen to something unbreakable. Miles spoke quickly. "I'll have a patrol unit follow you to a secure location tonight. Somewhere they can't find you easily. But Evelyn, you need to understand, these people are desperate. They filed that emergency hearing for tomorrow because they want this over before you can organize." Judith reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a flash drive. "This has copies of all your documents. Current will, trust papers, beneficiary updates, property deeds, everything. Keep it with you at all times. If you lose the originals, this is your lifeline." I slipped the drive into the hidden zipper pocket of my handbag. Miles added, "And we're going to make a move they won't expect. Tonight, after you're settled, I'll have an officer serve Harper and Graham with a notice of counterclaim. That way, they know you're not just defending, you're coming after them." The thought of their faces when they realized the game had changed almost made me smile. Almost. By late afternoon, Miles had arranged for us to stay in a safe house 2 towns over, a small brick cottage owned by a retired officer. We left through the back entrance of Judith's building to avoid the street, Noah clutching his backpack like it was the last familiar thing he owned. The safe house smelled faintly of cedar and clean laundry. It had 2 bedrooms, thick curtains, and, most importantly, a heavy deadbolt on every door. Noah went to lie down, exhaustion pulling him under. I stayed at the kitchen table with Miles, going over the plan for the hearing. "We'll present the video, the doctor's note, the bank alerts, and your statement about the intruder," he said. "I'll also get a written statement from Judith about the attempt on her office. It'll be enough to at least delay the petition and give us time to dismantle their claims." I nodded, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. "Detective, if they're willing to use that man to intimidate us, what's the next step for them?" He didn't sugarcoat it. "If they feel cornered, they might try to make you look unstable in a more dramatic way. Public incidents, staged accidents. Anything to create evidence for the court." I thought of the back steps where I'd stumbled last spring, and how easily that moment could be twisted into a narrative about frailty. Miles left just after sunset, promising a patrol car would check the perimeter every hour. I double-locked the doors and sat in the living room, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. My eyes kept drifting to Noah's bedroom door, needing the reassurance that he was still there, still safe. It was near midnight when the first sound came, A faint scratching at the back door. At first, I thought it might be a branch brushing against the wood. But then it came again, more deliberate this time, like the slow turn of a key in a lock. I reached for the phone, my finger hovering over Miles's number. And then I heard it. Noah's voice, muffled but urgent, from his bedroom. "Grandma, there's someone outside my window." My blood turned to ice. I was out of my chair before I realized I'd moved, my bare feet soundless on the carpet. "Stay in your bed, Noah," I called softly through his door. "Don't move until I tell you." His voice came again, trembling. "He's just standing there, Grandma, staring." I gripped the phone and dialed Detective Miles, whispering as soon as he answered. "He's here. Back door and Noah's window." "Stay inside, Evelyn," Miles said sharply. "I'm less than 10 minutes out. Don't open anything. I'm calling the patrol unit now." I set the phone down and moved to the hallway closet, pulling out the heavy flashlight Robert had kept by the bed for storms. Its weight in my hand steadied me. I eased into Noah's room, the curtains drawn tight. Noah was curled under his blanket, eyes wide. I pressed a finger to my lips, then crouched beside the window. Slowly, I pulled back a sliver of the curtain. The man in the dark jacket was there, closer than I'd imagined. His face was pale in the moonlight, lips curved in that same infuriating smirk. And this time, he lifted his phone and snapped a photo, flash off, movements deliberate. I let the curtain fall, my pulse hammering. "He's not getting in," I whispered to Noah. "Not tonight." From the kitchen came the faint metallic sound of the back door handle being tested. Then a soft thud, as if someone had leaned their full weight against it. I moved quickly, guiding Noah into the closet of the guest room. "Stay here. No matter what you hear, don't come out until I open this door." I pressed my phone into his hand. "If you hear me yell your name, you call Detective Miles right away." He nodded, swallowing hard. I went back to the kitchen, the flashlight raised like a club. Shadows shifted beyond the glass. A silhouette blocked the porch light, then stepped aside. My eyes locked on the deadbolt, still intact. Then, a sharp rap on the glass. Not a knock, a demand. My breath came slow and steady. "Get off my property," I said loud enough to carry through the door. No answer. Instead, he pressed something against the glass. My stomach clenched. It was a folded sheet of paper, held flat, so I could read the scrawl through the pane. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Don't show up in court. Last chance. Before I could react, headlights swept across the backyard. The man jerked his head toward the light, then vanished into the darkness. Moments later, I heard tires on gravel and the low growl of an engine pulling away. The patrol car screeched to a stop out front, lights flashing. Miles was right behind them, and within minutes the yard was swarming with officers. They found no trace of the man, just footprints in the dirt by Noah's window and a partial shoe print on the porch. Miles studied the paper through an evidence sleeve. "They're getting reckless. This is intimidation for the record." Judith arrived not long after, her hair uncharacteristically loose, worry etched across her face. "Evelyn, this hearing tomorrow, it's not just about your accounts anymore. If they can convince the judge you're unstable or under duress, they'll push for emergency custody of Noah. Claim you're not a safe guardian for him even temporarily." My heart twisted. "They wouldn't dare." "They would," Judith said. "And they're building toward it. That's why he was outside Noah's window. They want fear on your face in that courtroom." I looked at Miles. "Then they'll get something else instead." He raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Proof. Not just that I'm competent. Proof that they've been orchestrating every step of this. We go into court tomorrow not as defendants, but as prosecutors in all but name." Miles's mouth curved into a grim smile. "Then we'd better be ready to hit them hard." We spent the next 2 hours at the kitchen table, me, Miles, Judith, building a bulletproof chain of evidence. Phone logs, the bank's security alert, Noah's statement, the camcorder video, the doctor's note, Judith's eyewitness account of the intruder. Even the note from tonight, bagged and labeled. By the time they left, it was nearly 3 a.m. I checked on Noah. Fast asleep now, the phone still clutched in his hand, and then lay down myself. Sleep came in jagged pieces. When dawn broke, the air felt heavy with expectation. I dressed carefully. Navy suit, silver brooch Robert had given me our last Christmas together. A uniform for battle. As we stepped out to the waiting cruiser, Noah's small hand in mine, I caught sight of something tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. Another folded sheet of paper. I pulled it free and opened it. Just 3 words, written in thick black marker. The words you lose today bled into my eyes like ink in water. I stared at the paper for a long moment, my fingers tightening around it until the edges bent and curled. Noah looked up at me, searching my face. "What does it say, Grandma?" "Nothing we can't handle," I told him, sliding it into my handbag. I didn't want him carrying the weight of those 3 words. My weight was enough. Detective Miles was waiting by the cruiser, coffee in one hand, case folder in the other. He took one look at me and knew. Something else? I passed him the note without a word. He read it, his jaw locking. "We'll enter it as Exhibit A, harassment before a court proceeding. Judges don't like that." We drove in silence to the courthouse, the rising sun throwing long shadows across the streets. It felt almost too quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath for what was about to happen. When we pulled into the courthouse lot, I saw Harper and Graham already there, leaning against the hood of their shiny silver car. Harper was in a fitted navy dress, her hair perfect, her smile the practiced warmth of a politician. Graham stood beside her, hands in pockets, eyes fixed on me with the smug patience of a man who believed he was about to win. Noah's grip on my hand tightened. "Do we have to walk past them?" "Yes," I said, straightening my shoulders. "And we'll walk past them like we own the ground under our feet." As we passed, Harper's voice floated toward me. "Mom, you still have time to avoid embarrassing yourself in there." I didn't stop. I'm not the one who should be worried about embarrassment today. Inside, the courthouse smelled of wood polish and old paper. Miles led us to a small conference room to review our order of attack one last time. Judith arrived moments later, briefcase in hand, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Remember," she said, "we open with competency. Doctor's note, video, cognitive tests. Then we show the unauthorized account access attempts. Then the intruder and the stolen will. Finish with the harassment notes. It's a clean arc. You're competent, they're deceptive, and this is about control, not care." The bailiff's voice echoed down the hall. "Case of Ellis versus Carter, courtroom 2. We filed in, the wooden benches creaking under the weight of people taking their seats. Harper and Graham sat at the petitioner's table with their attorney, a slick man with a too-white smile and a gold watch that flashed under the lights. I took my seat beside Judith at the respondent's table. Noah sat directly behind me, Miles on one side of him, the uniformed officer from last night on the other. The judge, a silver-haired woman with keen eyes, took the bench. "This is an emergency petition for conservatorship filed by the petitioners on behalf of their mother, Mrs. Evelyn Carter. Petitioners, you may proceed." Harper's attorney stood, his voice smooth as glass. "Your Honor, we come before you today out of concern for Mrs. Carter's well-being. She has recently made erratic financial decisions, is vulnerable to exploitation, and has shown signs of memory lapses. We seek conservatorship solely to protect her." It was almost impressive, the way he wrapped poison in sugar. When it was our turn, Judith rose, her voice steady and crisp. "Your Honor, this petition is not about protection. It's about control and access to substantial financial assets. We will demonstrate that Mrs. Carter is fully competent, that she has been the target of coercion and intimidation by her own daughter and son-in-law, and that this petition is a preemptive strike to cover their tracks." One by one, the pieces fell into place. The video from my camcorder played on the screen, my voice clear and sure. Dr. Patel's statement confirmed my mental sharpness. The bank's alert log showed the blocked access attempt from Harper's phone. Judith recounted the intruder's visit to her office, the matching description of the man caught at my home, and the harassment notes, including the one from this morning. When Judith handed the final note to the bailiff, Harper's attorney objected. "Your Honor, This is irrelevant to the question of competency. The judge cut him off. It goes to motive. Overruled. I kept my eyes on Harper throughout, watching the flicker of irritation break through her composure. Graham's smirk had vanished entirely. Finally, the judge leaned back. Mrs. Carter, do you wish to address the court? I stood, my hands steady on the table. Your Honor, I am not here today because I am incompetent. I am here because I refuse to hand over what I have earned in 78 years of living, teaching, and surviving. My daughter and her husband decided that was unacceptable. They've lied, they've intimidated, and they've used the law as a weapon. I'm asking this court to deny their petition and to recognize that I am not the one who needs protection here. Silence filled the room. The judge's pen tapped once against her notes. I have heard enough, she said finally. Petition denied. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of possible criminal charges regarding the attempted unauthorized access to Mrs. Carter's accounts and any related intimidation. Harper's head whipped toward her attorney. Graham muttered something under his breath. But I didn't feel triumph, not yet. Because as we stood to leave, I saw Harper's phone light up on the table. The screen flashed with a single new message. From the same unknown number that had been sending me threats. And Harper smiled. That smile on Harper's face was not the smile of someone who had just been humiliated in court. It was the quiet, satisfied curl of lips that said, "You may have won the round, but the fight isn't over." As the bailiff escorted us out of the courtroom, I kept my eyes on her. She deliberately looked past me, leaned into Graham's ear, and whispered something that made him nod once. Then, without a word, they walked toward the exit that led to the side parking lot. Miles caught my expression. "What is it?" "They're not rattled enough," I murmured. They came in with a backup plan. Outside, the courthouse air felt colder than it should have for late morning. Noah was holding my hand tightly, but his eyes were darting around like a sparrow in an open sky. The officer assigned to us, Reynolds, walked a few paces ahead, scanning the crowd. When we reached the cruiser, my phone buzzed. No caller ID. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, low, measured, the kind of voice that didn't need to raise itself to be terrifying, said, "Court's over. Now we play for keeps." Click. I froze, my hand gripping the phone so hard it hurt. Miles saw my face and took the phone from me, checking the call log. Same block number as the threats before. "Get Noah in the car," he said. We're not standing in open ground. We were halfway into the cruiser when a black SUV rolled slowly past the curb. The same one from Judith's office parking lot. The man in the dark jacket was behind the wheel, one hand resting casually on the window frame. He didn't stop, just let the car glide by, his eyes meeting mine in the side mirror before he turned the corner and vanished. Miles swore under his breath. "He's sending a message. They know where you are, even with court security around." "Then we send one back," I said, my voice sharper than I expected. "We stop reacting. We take control." He gave me a quick look, then nodded. "What do you have in mind?" I glanced at Noah in the back seat. He was trying to look brave, but his knees were bouncing, his fingers twisting the straps of his backpack. "Somewhere safe first," I said. "Then we go on offense." We didn't go back to the safe house. Miles drove us to a hotel near the edge of town, a place so ordinary it was invisible. He booked the room under his name, paid in cash, and positioned a patrol car in the parking lot. Once Noah was settled in front of the TV with a sandwich, Miles and I sat at the small round table near the window. "You've got their patterns," he said. "You know their weak spots." "Yes," I replied. "Harper needs legitimacy. She's been telling people she's doing this out of love, that she's the responsible daughter. If we can pull that mask off in public, her whole plan collapses." Miles leaned back. "How public?" "Local news," I said. "They'll run a human interest piece if we give them something solid. Evidence, names, dates. And once it's out there, everyone she's been lying to will see her for what she is." He smiled faintly. "You think like a cop. Or a chess player." Before I could answer, Noah's voice cut in from the other side of the room. "Grandma? There's something outside the window. My heart jumped. I crossed the room in 2 steps, pulling back the curtain just enough to see. Parked 3 rows over, half hidden behind a pickup truck, was the black SUV. Only this time, it wasn't just the man in the dark jacket. Harper was in the passenger seat. She was holding her phone up, not to her ear, but pointed straight at our window. Recording. I let the curtain fall back into place, my pulse racing. Miles had already reached for his radio. Unit 14, we have a visual on the suspect vehicle, possible surveillance of protected individuals. Move in now. But as the patrol car in the lot swung toward them, the SUV roared to life and shot out onto the street. I watched it disappear, my hands trembling with something that wasn't fear anymore. It was fury. They're following us, I said, turning to Miles. Not just to scare me. They're collecting something. A photo. A video. Proof of, I don't know what yet. But they're building another narrative. Noah looked at me, his eyes wide. Grandma, what if they're making it look like you're the dangerous one? The thought hit me like a bucket of ice water. And the worst part was, I knew exactly how they could do it. I met Miles's eyes. We have to flip the script before they do. Tonight. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, my mind was no longer in defense mode. It was an attack. For days, I had been dodging their blows, patching up leaks, and bracing for the next strike. But now, every scrap of evidence I'd gathered was lined up in my head like bullets in a chamber. It was time to fire. Miles and I sat at the small hotel table, the glow from the single lamp pooling between us. I can't just wait for them to make their next move, I told him. They're controlling the pace. We need to pull the rug out from under them before they even realize I've moved. He nodded. So tell me your play. I want this to happen where they can't spin it. Not in court. Not in private. I want it public, undeniable, and documented. We're going to lure them into trying something tonight and make sure the whole thing is recorded. His brow furrowed. You mean bait them? Yes, I said. And I know exactly how to do it. Harper can't resist when she thinks she has the upper hand. All we have to do is give her something she thinks she can take from me. Miles leaned back in his chair, already scanning through scenarios in his head. What's the bait? The flash drive Judith gave me, I said. We'll make them think it's the only copy of my legal documents. I'll accidentally let them see me with it. You'll have your team set up surveillance, audio, and visual. When they come for it, and they will, we'll catch them red-handed. His lips curled into a slow grin. You're a dangerous woman, Mrs. Carter. Good, I said. That's what they should think. We set the trap quickly. Miles had 2 plainclothes officers park an unmarked car across from the hotel. Another officer set up a hidden camera inside the room, angled toward the door. I put the flash drive in a small velvet pouch and left it sticking halfway out of my handbag, just enough to be tempting. At 8:47 p.m., I stepped outside to get some air, the bag slung over my shoulder, making sure I lingered in the glow of the parking lot lights. The black SUV was parked 3 rows back. I didn't look at it directly, but I knew they were watching. At 9:12 p.m., there was a soft knock at the hotel room door. Noah froze on the couch. I put a finger to my lips and nodded toward Miles, who stood just out of sight with his hand resting near his holster. Another knock, this one a little harder. I moved to the door. Who is it? Housekeeping, a male voice replied. The hotel didn't have nighttime housekeeping. I unlocked the latch, but kept the chain in place, opening the door just an inch. The man in the dark jacket filled the gap, his face shadowed but unmistakable. Evening, Mrs. Carter, he said smoothly. Your daughter asked me to pick something up from you. Save us all a lot of trouble. His eyes flicked to the bag at my side. I smiled faintly. You mean this? I lifted the pouch just enough for him to see. His hand shot through the gap, grabbing for it. That's when Miles stepped into view. Police, step back. The man froze for only half a second before yanking hard on the chain, snapping it clean off the doorframe. He shoved the door wide, stepping inside, and found himself staring down 2 plainclothes officers with guns drawn. Hands where I can see them, one barked. From the hallway, Harper's voice rang out. What's going on in there? She appeared in the doorway, eyes darting from me to the flash drive to the officers. Her shock lasted only a moment before she hissed, "This is entrapment." Miles's voice was like granite. "No, Mrs. Ellis. This is a sting. And you just walked into it." One of the officers produced a small body cam, replaying the last 30 seconds, Harper urging the man forward, telling him, "She won't fight back, just grab it." The color drained from her face. They cuffed the man first, then Harper, reading them their rights. Graham appeared at the far end of the hall, but when he saw the scene, he turned and bolted, straight into the arms of another officer waiting by the stairwell. Noah was standing now, his small hands clenched at his sides. "Does this mean it's over?" I crouched to look him in the eye. "It means they can't touch us anymore." Miles leaned against the doorframe, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. "You just took down your own predators, Mrs. Carter. And you made it look easy." I glanced at Harper as they led her past. "It wasn't easy," I said quietly. "It was necessary." By the time the hallway emptied, the adrenaline had begun to drain from my body. My knees felt weak, but my heart felt steady for the first time in weeks. The next morning, the local news ran the footage. My voice calm, the man lunging for the pouch Harper caught giving the order. The public ate it up. Whatever reputation Harper had been clinging to collapsed in hours. Judith called that afternoon. "Evelyn, you're officially clear. And they're facing multiple charges. You've not only protected yourself, you've made sure they can't do this to anyone else." I sat at the kitchen table of the safe house, Noah beside me, sunlight pouring through the curtains. "Judith," I said, "I didn't just win. I made sure they lost." Noah smiled for the first time in days. "Grandma, you're kind of a legend now." Maybe I was. But more importantly, I was free. And I'd learned something I wished I'd known sooner. Silence may keep the peace for a while, but when someone threatens what you love, you don't stay quiet. You make your voice the loudest thing in the room. If this ending made you feel the power of standing your ground, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss another story like this. Your voice matters, use it.